Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. My name is Kevin Stein from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. I'd like to welcome you to I believe it's our 6th annual Safeguarding Health Information Conference. Also, on behalf of our co-hosts from the Office for Civil Rights at HHS, again, I'd like to welcome you. We have, so this being our 6th annual conference, we've seen the attendance increase steadily over the years. This year, we have roughly 200, maybe a little bit over 200 in-person attendees, but also close to 500 registered webcast attendees as well. So to those of you online, welcome. We're certainly excited about the agenda over the next 2 days, beginning with our keynote here shortly with Eric Dishman from Intel. Before we get started on the event, I'd like to go through a few things. So at NIST, we are certainly always concerned about safety. So in the event of some sort of issue that would require some evacuation, note the exits all along the left side and the right side, my left and my right, and in the back as well. There are restrooms in the back right-hand corner across from the tables where we'll be eating lunch later on. Lunch for those here in person will be provided as part of your registration fee, and that'll be set up the same place where the breakfast is set up. In terms, so let's see, let me go through a few slides here. So the presentations for today are posted at this link, and you can get to that from the main conference webpage that you use to register for the event. And those are included as hyperlinks within the agenda, so you can access those there. And I believe most of Day 2's presentations are posted as well, and we'll be doing some updates as we continue to receive those. Do a quick overview of the agenda for today. So in previous years, we've had split tracks in the afternoon. This year, we decided with the content that we had and I guess the broad applicability and the interest of the content to nearly everyone, we decided to go kind of a single stream for the agenda both today and tomorrow. So we're starting off now with welcoming remarks. That'll be followed by our keynote address, again from Eric Dishman at Intel. We'll have a short break to transition into a panel discussion on provider and patient identity management, continuing on with HIPAA requirements and mobile applications. After a lunch, again, which will be provided outside this room, we'll have a discussion on high tech and the cloud, followed by a presentation from OCR and reports on the OCR privacy, security, and the breach notification rule compliance program. And then after another short break this afternoon, we'll discuss leveraging social media, and then wrap up today, the first day of the conference, with HIPAA security awareness tools. So certainly touching a lot across a broad range of topics as it relates to HIPAA security and the broader topic of safeguarding health information. So certainly we're excited about the agenda and look forward to spending the next couple of days with you. For those of you either in the room or online that choose to that tweet and choose to participate in that way, we do have a hashtag associated with this event. It's the pound HIPAA security. For those online or in the room here, we will be taking questions through this channel as well. Those will go to a coordinator for our social media activities, and those questions will be relayed to either myself or to David Holtzman from OCR to help share those with the speakers as we go through the course of the sessions over the day. So with that said, and I apologize, we'll skip. There we go. Thank you. I'd like to introduce Matt Scholl from NIST. Matt is the Deputy Division Chief of the Computer Security Division at NIST, and he's going to provide some general welcoming remarks. So, thank you.
Good morning. It's always, you know where you sit in the organization when you're the guy who gets introduced to introduce the guy, right? You're the sandwich introducer. So I've attained my status as middle management. I've managed to claw my way up. Welcome. Thank you for coming. This is the 6th annual conference on HIPAA security and privacy, as Kevin had mentioned. I'd like to thank our co-hosts and partners, Health and Human Services, the Office of Civil Rights, and thank them specifically. Even though I'm up here welcoming you from NIST, this is really a joint welcome from the team. I'd like to thank all of our speakers and participants from industry, academia, and government for both participating on stage and yourselves for participating in the audience to help us work on the challenging issues that we all have with us today. It's funny, at NIST we're a measures and metrics organization. I like to take a look at the crowd and notice the ratio of neckties to laptop screens to people sitting in the back drinking coffee, and that ratio seems to be reflective of general counsel, healthcare providers, and technologists. I'll let you figure out who belongs to what group. So, more so than ever, healthcare is moving into the digital realm. And as part of enabling those technologies to achieve the promise which we all hope it will achieve, providing adequate and commensurate security and enabling the privacy of that information is critical for the nation to maintain the trust environment which currently exists. When I go to my healthcare provider, when I go to my doctor, I have an inherent trust in that person. I have an inherent trust that the medical advice that they are giving me is sound and correct, that the prescriptions and the medications that they're going to prescribe to me are appropriate, and that that person has been trained and is looking out for my best interests. That is an inherent trust that I extend to my healthcare provider. As we extend these trust networks, as we open these trust networks up using advanced technologies to allow for a larger set of healthcare and of providers to access information, and for me, as a citizen and an individual, to have access to better, personalized, and more specific point of care, in order to maintain that trust extension, which is a critical part of a doctor and a patient relationship and communication, we have a responsibility to ensure that the IT and the data is commensurate with that trust extension. And that's one of the things that we're all here trying to address today. So again, thank you for coming. Thank you for working together with us to both maintain and extend that trust, to both maintain and extend the quality and types of care which we can provide to the nation as a whole. And we recognize that this is a significant challenge for all of us. We recognize that there's a lot of work still to be done, and we also recognize the promise that holds for our future. In that note, I would like to introduce Eric Dishman from Intel. He said, just say, here's Eric, but I'm not going to let him get away with that, unfortunately. Eric is a Intel Fellow. He's also the General Manager of Health Strategy and Solutions Group in the Data Center and Connected Systems Group. He's responsible for driving Intel's cross-business strategy, R&D, product and policy initiatives for health and life sciences at Intel. He was also one of Wall Street Journal's 12 people who are changing the way you retire in the future. On those notes, I'll yield the rest of the time to Eric, and I'd like to welcome him to the stage. Eric Dishman.
From that, I'm on West Coast time, and as I arrived at my hotel last night and was settling into bed at 11:40 p.m., they started the construction work outside of my hotel room. And it finished at 6 a.m., just in time for traffic. So I am usually a pretty informal, unplugged person, but this will be even more unplugged and uncensored. So those on you on the web, I'm sure you'll hit record right about now, because no telling what this guy will say. It's an honor to be here. I really appreciate both NIST and OCR inviting me. I've called this Securing the Future of Health and the Future of Securing Health. So as you might expect, coming from Intel, I'm going to dive right in to the details of what we should do with AES&I and IPT in the case of VTTXT, IPT, AMT, and if we have an XD secure key problem, how are we going to actually deal with that? And if you think that's what I'm going to talk about, you're going to be very disappointed, because I know nothing about what my Intel colleagues are doing in terms of hardware-assisted security and privacy. It's very important work. I'm just not the person to actually talk about it here today. I don't understand most of those acronyms. I just trust that technology to work very well. And it is true that I run Intel's health and life sciences business, and it is also true that I'm a social scientist and have done thousands of hours of field work studying patients, family members, clinicians of all types in countries all over the world. But the perspective that I want to bring most importantly to the conversation today, and come back to the questions, is what I call my entrepreneurial patient's view. So I have some rather disclosive pictures here. You know, it's like, how often do you get to see yourself? I wish I had that stomach still. That's not what I look like anymore. I was born without hip sockets. There's a family story that's all about how my parents refused to say no when the doctors told them that I would actually never walk. And they found somebody who did a procedure that's now quite commonplace, and I have become a runner in my life as a result of that. So I learned right early in my life from this family narrative that I grew up with that you need to have an open mind when it comes to healthcare, and you can't necessarily accept the first opinion that you're given. I was a caregiver for a grandmother with Alzheimer's at age 16, so I experienced that entire saga and ordeal. And then at age 19 in college, I was diagnosed with rare forms of kidney cancer and said, you have a year to 2 to live. Now, they were wrong, and I actually, just in September, received my kidney transplant that I was never supposed to have. I won't shake hands. I'm on immunosuppressant, so you'll see us doing the elbow bump today. But it is that perspective as a patient. And in many ways, because I'm a patient who has lived in the high-tech world and had access to technologies that are coming but that are not yet commonplace, that's made me sort of a guinea pig and a prototype for the kinds of personal health systems and technologies that are coming and the challenges that we're going to have with actually securing those and making those private going forward. So that's a lot of the perspective I'll try to give you today, though I'll certainly weave in findings and elements of work that our Intel team have done. So I'm going to jump right in. Now, I have a love-hate relationship with HIPAA. I'm going to have to be perfectly honest. I'm a little bit nervous about this, to sort of admit this to this audience. Now, when I started in Silicon Valley, I started working for Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft. I was the first intern at his think tank in 1992. And I ended up working there for almost 8 years before I went to Intel. And in the summer of 1996, I was just doing my research on HIPAA, all right, and it passed initially in August of 1996. About 2 months before that, working for this think tank in Silicon Valley, a Stanford professor, a friend of mine, comes to me and says, Eric, are you interested in leaving to go join this startup lab at Stanford that are working on the future of search? And we, at this think tank, had our own search technology, and I'd been doing a lot of social science research trying to understand how consumers had mental maps of how they search for information, because you wanted to understand that if you were going to go build search engines. Now, at the time, I was deep into chemotherapy. I had just come off of all these years of being and underinsured and had acquired hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, and I was terrified about the possibility of leaving because my insurance was not necessarily going to be portable. So I said no. I said, I don't want to actually go to this. I'll just give you a little hint. What would it like? I put this in the search box. What would it be like to be a billionaire, right? Now, I don't regret this decision at all. Yes, I probably could have ended up being employee number 5 at 6 at Google. It was not called Google at the time. It was called Backpocket. And they had their initial PageRank technology. It wasn't even a company at that point. It was really mostly an effort at Stanford. But I have made choices throughout my life based on insurance and based on portability of insurance after earlier in my life, in my undergraduate and graduate years, being on and underinsured. So when HIPAA happened, the thing that was most important to me was the portability part of it. I didn't actually come to understand the privacy and security aspects of it until much later. And I'll tell you, in the studies that we do of patients around the world, there's this lovely woman that I remember in Rochester, New York, who we've been studying. We were actually trying to understand her privacy and security concerns. And she turns to me and says, honey, I don't have the luxury to be worried about privacy and security right now. I'm focused on survival. Right? So there's a way in which this was true for me as well, that initially the privacy and security concerns are not what is top of mind. Surviving the illness or surviving the economics of the illness are the first order concerns. And it's only sometime later that you start to sort of think through, what are the implications of this? What are the privacy? Now that I've survived, I have the luxury to sort of think through, what are the privacy and security issues around this? And we find this with a lot of the patients that we actually study. Now, So I had a wonderful relationship with HIPAA in terms of its portability. Later in my journey, the very first clinical trial for the diseases I had been diagnosed with came along. And in order for me to get on that clinical trial, I needed to actually collect the data from the well over 30 hospitals that I had been treated in as I had lived in all these different places around the country. And I remember I would call up, I remember calling Duke, and I remember calling North Carolina Memorial, because I needed to get all this data to be eligible for this clinical trial. And these are all still paper records back then, and fax machines were king, if not still. And I remember talking to one of the nurses on the phone, who actually remembered me, because I'm a pretty proactive patient and pretty memorable. And she's like, hey, Eric, how are you doing? She starts to ask me how my wife is doing. So she's clearly identified who I am. And I'm like, I need you to send our records because I'm trying to get eligible to get on this clinical trial. And by the way, this went hospital after hospital after hospital. And she said to me, oh, we're not allowed to send you your records because of HIPAA. And our new fax machine is down. It was the wrong countries. They had like a Japanese fax machine as opposed to a U.S. fax machine. And I heard some version of this from health provider after health provider after health provider. It's not true that they could not fax to me in HIPAA, but their misunderstanding of HIPAA as an organization and their response to HIPAA meant that they were keeping me from getting my records, not helping me to get it. And I missed getting on the first clinical trial ever for the disease that I had because we could not get my records together in time. Right? So these are cultural challenges that emerge not because of what's in statute or rule, but because of how the culture misunderstands and appropriates it and sort of moves forward from there. Couple more recent example. I was lucky enough to actually have my whole genome sequenced. I think there's about 47,000 of us on the planet that have had this at this point. There's some analysts suggesting that well over 1 billion of us will have done it by 2020. So think about that as one of the data challenges and privacy and security challenges that we're going to have going forward. And in my case, my physician said, you know, your sequence changed everything we knew about your diseases. And that was true. It completely put me on the path to be able to even have that kidney transplant back in September. If we hadn't done this, I'm not sure that we would have ended up on this path, because it reworked our entire understanding of all the treatments that we had been misgiving me for the previous 2 decades. But then I called some weeks ago and said, I want to actually get my data and try to understand it because I want to know what else you could learn about me from my genome. And they said, oh my gosh, our company got bought out. I can't send you your genome data anymore. I don't even know where it is. And that's the moment when I started to say, well, okay, it helped me survive, but what else could somebody know about me based on this data? I don't understand it. And what are the implications of this? And who actually owns the data? And where is it? And even if they could send it to me, it would be a hard drive filled with a 500 gigabyte file. The initial sequences were 5 terabytes. They got shrunk down to 500 gigabytes. What would I do with it? Right? So it's clear that we have a bunch of issues to try to understand what it's going to mean to secure data that's that large and what it's going to mean to sort of incorporate it into culture and how it's going to play a part in our lives and what are the implications for it. And then finally, some of you may have seen a TED Talk I just gave a few weeks ago. I actually, on stage, I started to do it today, but it takes too much time, did a live ultrasound of myself on stage. The new kidney sits here. The old ones are up here, but the new kidney is actually placed right here, connects in the femoral vein. And I did a live checkup with my doctor on stage using a portable ultrasound that plugs into a cell phone. And that was an image that I actually took measuring this dark spot that had appeared. It was nothing. It was benign and nothing to worry about on the new kidney. But it was interesting. So my whole transplant recovery experience, I was actually trying to do my care at home as much as possible. They've loaded me up with immunosuppressants so that the kidney doesn't get rejected. But they're having me come into the clinic 3, 4, or 5 times a week, the most dangerous place that I could possibly be. So I was trying to do telehealth. I was trying to push them to say, look, I can do lab work at home. There are companies emerging that you can actually do urine tests and blood tests at home and then send that stuff in. It's much cheaper, right? It sort of just makes sense to do virtual care and even possible to start doing diagnostics like this in a home environment. And it was really funny as we tried to explore this. They said to me, well, you still need to come to the clinic because these technologies are great and wow, this is game-changing, but we have no idea if this data is protected. So you've done your job, right? I mean, there's this sort of sensibility. It's like between, the cell phone network and all the places that this data goes, this sort of untrust of the infrastructure that we've got to know whether or not it's going to get there. Now, we have to solve those problems because me being cared with chemo at home is 1/10 of the cost and about 10x the safety, right? If we don't sort of allow care anywhere to occur and figure out the policies and the infrastructure and the sort of human training to allow that occur, we're not going to be able to solve the cost problems and the access problems that we have going forward. So I want to step back a little bit and ask you to think about what can catastrophe teach us about securing the future of healthcare, for us to think about security for where healthcare is going. And I want to kind of take you back to a little bit more than a year ago to the Japanese earthquake and tsunami. I'm sure all of you saw footage like this. It was so shocking to see those waves coming over and then to just see these, burning homes and just mess in the water. I live in Oregon, and we're now getting a lot of this starting to wash up on our shore. It's like a newscast every day about what new piece of debris has come over. And this was the most sort of arresting image. But what was interesting, if you actually started to watch the footage and the recovery from Japan, is this. Almost everybody in the photos had gray hair. And that's because Japan is ahead of the rest of the world in the age wave curve that we're all about to face. I mean, when you looked at the news footage, and then I started looking for it, you'd see person after person out in the rubble with pickaxes in this weather trying to find remains of their home, and they look like our grandparents, right? And it's like, wow, this is what an aged society is going to be like. So if you start looking at the gray of Japan, they call it from moving from a tree to a kite. So you see 1950, then 2005, then the 2050 forecast. And people, 80 and above on the top. This is a harbinger of what's to come for the rest of the world. And we all know this. I mean, we all talk about aging baby boomers and so forth. But we haven't actually really internalized the fact that when you look at the graying of the planet, this was the number of people over the age of 60 in the years 2002. You already see Western Europe there in orange, 25 to 29% of the population over the age of 60. Are we surprised that they're having economic challenges and bailouts? I mean, you look at pension challenges, look at healthcare cost challenges, look at lack of younger workforce to sort of drive new industries. All of those things, again, are a harbinger of what's to come in most of the rest of the world. Here's what it looks like in 2050. Right? We double and then double again the number of people over the age of 60 in a 50-year period between 2000 and 2050. Healthcare as usual will not work and scale to those aging demographics. And it's not just that we have to take care of older people. It's like we've got to figure out the age-old battle. You can see it playing out in the states now as federal funding is reduced in the U.S. The states are having to decide between education and health for the new generations versus paying for the health of the chronic care of the old, right? And we pit schools against hospitals or schools against nursing homes in this sort of endless debate. And this challenge, this cultural challenge, is only going to increase. In fact, some years ago, in 2010, Standard & Poor's put out this report about demographics. And the gist of the report, if you haven't read this, you should read it. It's pretty sobering. Their number one variable for calculating the economic viability of a country is its ratio of older people to younger people, and the implications of the sort of demographic sort of unfolding economically as we sort of go forward, right? So I would argue that securing the future of our nation's healthcare system in an era of global aging is fundamentally a national security issue. So these are the global megatrends. One of the things that's great about working at Intel is my team works globally. We have people all over the world. We've worked on health reform and health innovation bills in a good 30 or 40 countries. So we have a very sort of U.S.-centric perspective right now around ACA and so forth. But you should understand that these are global megatrends that are happening. So first is that global aging that I mentioned. The second, which we're all talking about in the United States right now with accountable care organizations, some form of coordinated care. A shift from this paradigm of specialty care to collaborative care is occurring in almost every country that we look at. Payment reform, shifting from pay for volume to pay for value, right? Some version of that, almost every country tackling. Even a lot of the countries that have socialized medicine or government-sponsored medication had a fee-for-service layer on top of those payments that was driving the same perverse behaviors of use the system, use the system, use the system that we have in the United States. And no one's all figured it out, but everybody's struggling to figure out how do we do pay for quality and pay for results. Personalized medicine, so this shift from population-based medicine where we're going to guess about you as an individual patient based on randomized clinical trials that we did of people that may or may not be like you some 10 years ago or even 1 year ago. And then this consumerization, right? Increasing consumer responsibility for payment and accountability of your own health. And a shift to very different cohorts, very different demographic cohorts who expect to be in more control of their own health than perhaps cohorts that have been there before them. And then finally, the disruptive technologies are coming. Mobile, social, analytics, big data. All of these technologies that are going to change the game for what it means to treat a patient and move from sort of guesswork to customized care. And dozens of countries are moving beyond these unsustainable models of old healthcare that we have. And the question is, who is going to win this space race to deliver 21st century care and all the industries and jobs and IP and technologies that support them? And I'll give you some sense that the U.S., I don't think, is on a path to win that space race. So what we call at Intel, this where healthcare is going, we call it personal health. And it started sort of rooted in this. If you think about healthcare and you think about the metaphor of mainframe computing to personal computing, it's the same metaphor I want to apply to healthcare. We are stuck in a mainframe paradigm of healthcare, especially in the U.S. and especially in a lot of Europe. We invented the idea of a general hospital in the 1780s in Vienna and then scaled that out. It's not some God-given natural right that says, thou shalt put experts in a large facility that cost a lot of money and wait until people are sick and ship them there to get put back together again, sort of Humpty Dumpty medicine and send them home. And I don't mean to be crude and crass, but that is the premise of our healthcare system in lots of parts of the world. And it's centralized, it's expert-filled, it's these big megaplexes, and it's much easier, relatively speaking, to control protected health information in those environments where there's, an IT shop and there's security and data flows that can be somewhat locked down because it's all within the control of what's in your campus. But that world is quickly blowing apart, and it must, given the demographics that I just showed you. So at Intel, our strategy for a good 12 years now has been what we call shift left. Just conceptually imagine quality of life on the left axis, cost of care per day on the right axis. Nobody wants to be over in the bottom right-hand corner in the intensive care unit. I just got out of it for my surgery and was doing everything I could to get out of that as quickly as possible, right? You want to be independently living, managing your chronic diseases. If you have to go anywhere, you want to go to your doctor's office in your local community. The cost per day is less. The quality of life is presumably better, and the level of provider skill needed. So what can we do to either shift left or stay left conceptually within this diagram? What kinds of innovations of either care models or technology or business models will facilitate that? So if you think about a campus, I'm not anti-hospital. They will always exist in some way, shape, or form, though there are many countries that are closing them, knowing that they need to get rid of beds because they're dependent on them, and they need to invent new paradigms. And we will probably do that as well here in the U.S., and we will end up using hospitals for what they're used for, emergency situations and extreme environments where you need those experts to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. But that's not the right tool to use for the vast majority of care that's actually delivered. We've done work with hospital-at-home programs in Israel, France, and the U.S., and it looks like 60 to 70% of care that's done in a hospital could be done effectively and safely at home. Now, there's challenges in securing that information because of all the infrastructure that we need to think about end to end to be able to do that. But from a clinical outcomes perspective and from a cost perspective, more of that's going to have to be done. So here we are looking at, this is St. Vincent's Hospital in Portland. They have saved my life. Now, as a social scientist and having a team of social scientists at Intel that go study people around the world, we actually have patients do what we call a place map. This is just an example of a place map. A patient, we will ask them, list all the places and all the experts who are part of your family's care, broadly, right? You tell us who makes up your place map. They will almost always list first the main hospital. My children were born here. We love them. We trust them. There's often a great relationship of trust with that hospital in their local community. But then they will proceed to list all the other domains and places that are central to their family's care. And it very quickly becomes lots of places that are disconnected from one another. If you want to do true care coordination, if you want an accountable care organization to actually work, then connecting to these other nodes of care that are part of people's real everyday lives is going to be one of the big challenges as we go forward. So if you think about my own care map here, I couldn't even do it at a hospital level. This is my care map in a global view. And because I'm a proactive patient with money, means, and I speak English, I can actually do a fairly good job of coordinating my own care. But I'm not a physician, right? I mean, it's a difficult task even for me to do. And I can call CEOs and senators and get help when I need it, right? Most people don't have access to the kinds of things that I do. And I'm trying to do it across 5 countries, 18 cities, 27 hospitals, and 50-plus clinics, right? This is the world in which I live in. Now, not everybody has that much diversity, but if you go back to that last slide, almost everybody has that much diversity where within their local community, there's a good 10 to 15 nodes of care that are pretty central to their lives. So the first notion of personal health is distributed, right? Moving from campus to community care. And conceptually, parts of the hospital capacity have to be driven out to the workplace, the primary care office, even the car or the home. right? That's what we're actually trying to think about. And what are the technologies and the business models and the care models that will support that? And then, this big question about how do we secure protected health information in a community-based care model, where increasingly people on the team are going to be family members, neighbors, and community health workers who aren't controlled by any one employer and controlled by any one provider, controlled by any one IT shop, right? If you think bring your own device in clinics now is the problem, we're going to have to work in a world in which everybody on the care team is bringing their own device, and there's not necessarily a monolithic IT shop over all of those things going forward. The second piece of this is really personalized, right? It's back to that notion of we've got to move from population views to personal views, right? I do not want to be treated as the average of that crowd, right? My body is not the same as the average of that crowd of people who were studied in some clinical trial. That's not the right resolution to understand Eric as a patient. At the same time, just understanding the particular cells in my particular tumor in my left kidney is way too narrow of a view. We don't have the right informatics yet to sort of understand. We need both of those data types. What's going on with population analytics? What's going on at a cellular level with me? But understanding and knowing me as an individual patient is a complex thing that requires a whole lot of different data types brought together. And we all know that a lot of these data types either don't exist yet or don't exist electronically or are interoperable, and they're not being brought to bear in a complex adaptive system model of the patient as an individual. That world is coming. There are pioneers sort of working on it. Some of them are starting to combine genomics data and clinical histories to at least get a pretty good predictive model of who you as a patient are, but we're not quite there yet. And everything's sort of, as we get digitization done, everything's starting to move to analytics, and everybody's starting to work on this piece about how you pull all those data types together. Now, as a result of that, this is going to be an enormous, I'll come back to that, there's going to be an enormous variety, volume, and velocity of data. Right? The healthcare data over the last 4 years has grown faster than it had in the previous 25 years. And it's just nothing. I mean, go back to the sort of example of genomics I gave you. If we're all going to have, it's not that you will be sequenced once in your life and then you're done. It's not that the first billion people will be sequenced once and we're done. If you were on a course of chemotherapy, it's expected that you would probably get sequenced once a week to see how you were doing. It's not that your fundamental DNA changes, but that can actually tell things about how proteins are forming and what's going on in your body as a result of it. So, we're talking about the explosion of data and a data spiral that we haven't even begun to anticipate yet. Because on the left, we have these islands of data. We access this data in sort of delay time. Most of this data is pretty crude. It's sort of ones and zeros, filling out sort of spreadsheets of what were your vital signs this time, last time, and so forth. There's radiological data. IBM's study showed that of the world's data that was stored, 30% of it was medical imaging, right? So, and that's just going to explode even more as we sort of go forward. If you start to have cell phones that can start to do medical imaging, if you start to have medical devices that increasingly become consumerized and show up in the home and every clinic, we're just going to move that data even more. On the right, it's going to be a whole bunch of different kinds of data types from across organizations and firewalls. And a lot of that data is going to become much more high bandwidth as well as more complex as we go forward in time. This is going to require security, privacy, interoperability from hospital to home. And we're going to have to figure out how to do that. We're going to have to figure out how to demand it. We're going to have to figure out how to enable it. And we're going to have to figure out how to build trust so that patients and providers within these more complex networks have confidence in the system and know that it's working. So I want to give you a couple examples of some personal health data. I'm going to pop out of this application. These are sort of old examples of research that we did almost a decade ago in some cases. But they kind of give you an idea of some of the data types that are coming and some of the challenges that we're going to have to protect this information. So let me pop into this software. I'll start with an example of what we call Care Anywhere. There's basically three pieces of personal health that we're working on at Intel, and I think conceptually that we observe happening around the world. The three pillars of personal health are basically Care Anywhere, Care Networking, and Care Customization. Care Anywhere is fundamentally about diagnostics and capabilities being moved out of that mainframe and into our everyday lives, and the abilities for us to start to do care in a virtual way. The second, Care Networking, is much more about using social technologies, which have not been brought to bear very successfully in healthcare yet, to coordinate that team with collective decision support of all the people that are there. Some example of some work that we're doing in China and in Africa, in places that don't and can't afford big mainframe hospitals necessarily, is just using tablet computers to connect community health workers with one another and online training, and then tracking the quality of care that those that those community health workers are delivering. Right? We're going to have to track the quality of care that neighbors and family members provide as much as we are that the doctors and nurses provide. There will be neighbors that can be trained and do a good job of helping someone out, and you want to continue to support them and help them thrive, and there will be ones that are horrible and should no longer be asked to actually provide that care to that neighbor. Having networking tools that allow for that collective decision support and team-based care is a big part of care networking. And the third is this care customization. Having a common definition of what a care plan is so that everybody on that team knows what the patient's goals are and are designing the care towards those goals. That's a radical act in and of itself. Most electronic health records don't even have a spot for a care plan. Right? You go ask your doctor what your care plan is the next time you go, and unless you're just being discharged from a hospital, most of the time they will look at you quizzically and be like, what do you mean? Now, if we're going to customize care down at the individual level, yes, there's our genomics, and that's certainly a big piece of customized care, but how can you customize for me if you don't even know what my goals are? Right? For years in my own cancer treatments, people were optimizing for longevity. I was optimizing for quality of life and time on the mountain skiing. We put that in my chart. Choose drugs that let me have quality of life skiing. By the way, I think that helped lead to longevity, right? So what your patient goals are, and even being educated as a patient to know that you need to have goals that get articulated in the electronic health record into a decision support tool, that's part of the challenge that we have going forward. So let me give you an example first on Care Anywhere. Many years ago, we started working on Parkinson's, and even diagnosing Parkinson's is very difficult. Over 50% of the people in our Parkinson's studies, it took over 14 months for them to get diagnosed because they don't necessarily present with classic tremor. And even if they do, there's a lot of other kinds of tremor that can be there. So coming up with objective measures of Parkinson's, and there's the UPDRS, the Universal Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale, was very difficult. There are lots of people that have worked on these big, expensive, like in some cases, $1 million balance platforms that could look at motion. There are all these sort of very expensive tools that you needed to come into the clinic to use to try to figure out whether you really had Parkinson's. And even those were pretty unreliable, but they were certainly unaffordable. So we said, all right, could we care anywhere by taking a lot of those objective measures, supposedly objective measures, and make them into a home device so that this could be done from a home environment? So we built this prototype of this device, a laptop-sized device, and it basically let you do a range of tests. In this front here was a series of what's called quantitative digitography. Think of this as a MIDI piano keyboard, and you go back and forth with your fingers like this as quickly as you can for about a minute. I'll show you some data from this in a second. You and I, who don't have Parkinson's, can do this pretty consistently for 60 seconds to 2 minutes. Somebody with Parkinson's will fatigue first, and there's other factors that start to show up in the amount of pressure that they can push on the keys. Pegboard test, move the green pegs from the left over to the right and back. These two arcade-like buttons go back and forth, and also a reaction time test. When you hear the beep, move from the left to the right. And then there were you wore a watch that measured your tremor all the time, and it would hold about a week's worth of data and would sit in that little docking station on the left-hand side. And then there were a series of speech tests. Two speech tests. You put on this little Madonna-looking headset. This was, 10, 12 years ago. The headsets are much nicer now. You wear the Google glasses, I guess. And you would actually go, ah, for as loud and as long as you could. And then we would actually just try to get you speaking normally because we were looking at what's called fundamental frequency variability, the amount of change in your voice, right? If you think about it, the voice mechanism is a muscle, and it ends up being one of the first sensitive muscles that actually starts to jitter well before it becomes audible, but very detectable to a computer. So we put all these things into a device. We did this work with Andy Grove and his foundation. Andy has Parkinson's. And what you can see here is, I'll give you an example of some of the sample data. This is like the fatigue factor. Actually, this one's even better. So what you see on the top here is the fatigue factor for somebody that was healthy, not Parkinson's. What was in the middle was advanced Parkinson's disease on their medication, and what you see is the same patient down below off of their medication, right? We call this behavioral markers. And the world is so obsessed with biological data and the capture of traditional vital signs that we're missing the fact that we're emerging into a world where computing has so much sensing and diagnostics can be embedded into a chip of every cell phone that there's all these opportunities to capture behavioral markers and trends for disease to show the onset or to track the deterioration of the disease over a period of time. And the point here is this kind of capability that used to take a sort of standalone box like we did all those years ago is going to be as ubiquitous as the smartphones that are around us. And we can start to collect activity data with these things that are unknown to us what it's going to tell us about the emergence of disease. My team's actually worked on looking at changes of people's openings of phone conversations as perhaps an insight into the opening of dementia. You think about what goes on in a phone conversation, phone rings, you answer it, hi, hey. If you recognize the person right away, you don't even say your names. If you start to compare how you're doing at openings of phone calls with familiar people, and then compare that to see what's emerging over time, it might be one of the best early indicators of the onset of Alzheimer's, and we've done serious work to go investigate that. Privacy issues abound, right? Because all of this personal information that we might start capturing, we might not even think of it as health information literally, but once it's part of a big data schema that's trying to make sense of a set of parameters going through, suddenly all data could become protected health information. These are issues that we're going to have to think through because this world is fast coming upon us in a world of care anywhere. Let me show you a second example of care networking. Again, this was pre-Facebook, a long time ago. So as we started studying people with Alzheimer's, and by the way, we studied security and privacy as fundamentally, every study that we do, we go out and actually study security and privacy as part of this. The first point I should make about this is different cultures have radically different notions of justice, fairness, government, privacy, and security. Like everything that we hold sacred in this room about what we're trying to do with HIPAA in the U.S. just almost doesn't apply in lots of other countries because their notions and their fundamental belief systems are so radically different than ours that it doesn't apply. And so as we have more immigrants moving into the United States, we can't assume that one size fits all. We want to do everything we can to secure the data, right? That should just be a given. But orienting to people's privacy concerns, it's so different, and this is a perfect example. So in this study, we were trying to help people with early stages dementia or mild cognitive impairment to stay socially active. It was really clear to us that once your social network failed, and you had to rely on an institutional mainframe clinical network, that's when you became expensive, that's when you became depressed, and that's when things started to spin out of control. So our goal was to help people maintain their social networks for as long as possible. In this example, we actually collected, with their approval, the amount of physical activity around the house to get some sense of whether two people were there or it was a person living alone. So it was basically a co-presence detector. Did somebody else come and spend time with you co-present? We collected the amount of information that was how much time they were on the phone, not who they were talking to and not the actual phone calls. And then if they used online communications of email and things like that back then, how much time they were doing that. And we put all of that into a social health index, right? And we could actually sort of, basically show them, given all your sort of socials, here's your sort of social health norms, and here you are declining or here you are increasing and so forth. But then we started to build these kinds of tools. The first was just a very simple kind of caller ID on steroids. These are people that can't remember the names and faces of loved ones. They're still trying to work, and the phone was basically just, this is Geraldine, she's your sister or she's your boss, you've known her for lots of years, and just a tidbit about what your last conversation was with that person when they called. We didn't record that. The people on both ends of the line typed in a few notes after their last conversation to try to help the next conversation be better. Now, the other tool that we gave them here was this. It was called, one woman called it the solar system social network. So we'd take all that data and we would help the seniors sort of see who within their social network they had been interacting with recently, those people were close to them, and who they had not externally. Remember, they can't necessarily remember. And over the course of the pilots of this, over the months, they would start to put up sticky notes and be like, I can't believe Sarah's way out here on my periphery. She's core to my life. I'm just forgetting to engage with her. And she'd leave herself sticky notes, and they'd start calling, or Sarah would come over to visit, and they would see the tool sort of move in over a period of time. That was incredibly powerful for them. Now, one of the women in this study called this the inheritance detection system. The good children are right there close in, and there's the bad children out here, and there's living proof, right? There's data. Now, the privacy and security issues of this were really interesting, right? I mean, there were some of the people in the study that were like, you can put this data on the internet. I don't even care, right? There were other people that were like, I want to be able to choose who gets this. I want my doctor to be able to get the results of this, and my older daughter, but I don't want my younger daughter and my asshole son to be able to see this, right? And the point here is that privacy is incredibly personal. Everybody had privacy concerns, but they were radically different. And the right way to design this tool was first to make it as secure as possible, But second, to give them choices without them having to be a network administrator and coming down to right-click on properties and decide who gets what. The design challenges here was to develop a tool that let them control the information flow and privacy within their network, and that was a very, very difficult task. But this is a good example of care networking and a good example of this question about what is personal or protected health information in the future in which we're headed. So let me sort of wrap up with that, with a final slide that sort of lays this out and tries to give you some sense of the grand challenges I see going forward. If care is going to go anywhere and we're going to start to do virtual, what do we do when every device generates potential health data? Every device, right? We don't know yet, a priori, which data sets are going to be useful and which are not going to be part of a model that we're going to do. What is protected health information in a future where daily activities and data, example, your shopping receipts, and looking at one of the ways that families discovered in our Alzheimer's studies that mom or dad may have Alzheimer's was their relationship to money and the receipts that would start to come in, and they would actually buy the same thing over and over again. The best early indicator of Alzheimer's may not be a diagnostic test. It may be changing in your shopping habits. How will patients and providers know and trust that they're in a secure zone as they move across so many locations and start to do care virtually? They assume a certain level of trust that's probably unjustified by walking into that clinic and hospital. But when they walk virtually, how do we sort of show that trust to them? In a care networking model, when campus boundaries and networks blur, who authenticates who? Who's in charge of access to it? Who is the IT manager? We're not going to know in a lot of these cases. What is a covered entity in a network care model where family, friends, and neighbors are formally part of the team and are trained and the quality of care that they're tracked is part of the equation? Well, how do we deal with widely ranging patient cohort and intercultural expectations about privacy and security as well as tech literacy? We cannot continue to think that one size fits all. Again, secure everything, but let privacy be personalized because that's what the patients want and that's what they deserve. And then finally, care customization. How do we educate everyone in the world about the good and bad implications of genomic data, the example that I gave you just a while ago? If we're going to go from 47,000 people to 1 billion people in an 8-year to 10-year period, and it's going to become part of sort of de facto test that we do, we have a whole set of moral and principled and privacy and security issues that we need to start doing now, or the magic of these capabilities is not going to be available to many people. Right? This is probably my biggest message to you, is we in this audience have to skate to where the puck is going in terms of health privacy and health security. We don't want to be the ones that are slowing it down and stopping it because it will probably happen without us anyway. We have to be as creative and as innovative and as accelerated on the privacy and security policies, cultural change, education, and technology infrastructure as the rest of the technologies themselves. And that would be my number one message to you. Thanks very much. I'm happy to take questions if we got time, for as long as you like. Any questions or comments? I can barely see you. I have to come over here out of the light.
I'm Sue Miller. I'm a healthcare attorney. I don't hear you talking about health plans. How do they fit into this? I get called now by my health plan, and the one that I got was, now, so we'll protect your HIPAA, you have to tell me all the demographics about you. So it's the opposite of what you're talking about, but they fit into this somewhere.
Yeah, obviously the health plans in the U.S. are undergoing as much change and confusion about what their identity is and who they're going to be going forward as possible. Every health plan that we know is trying to they don't call it this, but they're trying to figure out a care anywhere model. As soon as reimbursement starts to change to a bundled payment model or to a fee for results, suddenly their interests in things like telehealth and mHealth and e-care have gone to the roof. They don't know how to do it. They haven't scaled it in a very large way at this point, but they know that's the future of where they have to go because they can't afford to keep paying for everybody going to the mainframe for every single care encounter. So they're all sort of going through this transformation and trying to figure out what that means as well. I've experienced the same thing that you have. Where what's funny is, I wish I had this slide here. The other day, I did an analysis of the number of healthcare entities that have contacted me saying they will be my trusted central repository for all of my health data. Cigna has said it. Medco has said it. My local provider has said it. The team that actually did my transplant has said it. And I'm like, folks, There is no way all of you can be the owner of my one-stop shopping for my personal health record. My employer offers 2 different coaching sessions, right? So everybody's trying to coach me. Everybody's trying to use analytics. The analytics are pretty crude and stupid at this point. They are pretty sure I'm depressed, even though I'm not, because they give me trazodone to help me sleep at night post-transplant because the drugs keep you awake. So now they're like sending me stuff about transplant. They're pretty sure I have asthma because once in 1976 I got a Ventolin inhaler, so they're trying to send me coaching on asthma. It's like, I don't have asthma, right? So the analytics are crude and not very helpful at this point. But it's kind of like electronic health records, right? I mean, everyone's like, there's all this sort of hubbub about, EHRs aren't worth it. I'm like, nonsense, folks. This is like saying that, the interstate travel, highway system is not worth it. At the point at which you're doing it, it's a mess, and you're moving from an old model to a new model. If we sort of stop and take our eyes off the ball of building out the basic infrastructure for digitization, we will never get to the more interesting things that digitization allows in terms of personalization, customization, and cost control. So we've got to start to stay on that path. I think we're all sort of in a transitional mess from mainframe to personal, and it's going to take us another 15 to 20 years to get there. And it's probably going to be uglier and more expensive before it's prettier and less expensive. And most disruption is that way, right? I mean, never seen, as I go look at historical case studies of the diffusion of innovations and disruptions in industries, that it's not ugly, more expensive, and painful for the first while. And then you get to some crossing the chasm point where you look back and say it's a lot better. So our relationship with health plans are going to have to change. The health plans are going to have to figure out how they can do virtual care. And the health plans are going to have to figure out how to do it without controlling everybody in the ecosystem. They're all trying to sort of acquire the physicians' groups, acquire the doctors' offices. But if you go back to that patient map of all the nodes of care and all the people involved, the health plan can never own all of those people. They're going to have to put tools in that facilitate that kind of community-based collaborative care. And by the way, the other countries that we work in that don't have this mainframe system are going straight to these models right away. So back to that issue of U.S. competitiveness, are we going to be the country that's sort of at the forefront of building out these personal health systems and technologies and IP and jobs? Not unless we change the current course and speed that we're on. China, Brazil, India, many other countries in the world are going straight to these kinds of models. And on the way, they're discovering how to do analytics, how to do personalized medicine, and they're developing the IP and jobs to go do that.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm great. Now that this is over, I'm really good.
Thanks for coming and presenting to us. There's a couple of things I was just trying to logic out, Eric. One is you used yourself quite a bit in your presentation, and I would say you're probably not the typical person. You are a man of means.
Oh, completely true. Yep.
And so when we talk about the capabilities of people in your model, it gets a little bit confusing, especially around the empowerment of us being informed, thus making good decisions, as well as utilizing our social network. I know I probably don't want Bob down the street who doesn't know how to give me an IV properly without creating an infection in my arm. So could you help me understand a couple of those thoughts?
Sure.
Or clarify?
Yeah, so we have, at Intel, we have both a segmentation model of patients and patient engagement, and we have a segmentation model of seniors, and we have a segmentation model of providers. The provider segmentation model is premised upon their ability to do collaborative care and where they fall on that continuum, and their ability to do holistic care as opposed to specialty care. The segmentation model of patients, you're absolutely right. There's roughly 15 to 20% of patients who will never be able to do any of this for themselves or won't or will refuse to. There's probably another 10 to 15% in our surveys and studies that have the ability and the time to actually go do a lot of these things now and the desire to do it. And then there's these segments in the middle. I can't pull up the segmentation model quickly. No way at all do I. In fact, I undercut my own sort of. I am not representative, right? I know that. I'm in that extreme. I'm in the top 1% in terms of that extreme early adopter and proactive patient. That being said, we've now done pilots of new technologies with the frailest of the frail seniors of the lowest socioeconomic status in the United States and in several other countries. They can learn new technologies. We were told people with mild cognitive impairment could not learn new technologies and would never be able to do it. If you showed them the value proposition and you had a training program in place, then they could do it and they would do it, and they did do it in a sustainable way. So I think we are too quickly generalizing from ourselves And we are too quickly generalizing that all providers are the same, and that all patients are the same, right? And that all family members are the same. And this is the point, right? I mean, even if we could only get 30% of patients to do some of these things, or 20% of patients to do these kinds of things, that's going to change the model. And that's probably the best we can hope for now, until we sort of train new generations on how to do that. In terms of the community health worker models that we have, in places like China where we're doing some of this work, there is no scenario in which there will be enough doctors and nurses to catch up with the demographic of China. They will have as many older people by the year 2025 as we have the entire population of the United States because of the one-child policy coming back to haunt them. So as we've set out to help to go do these care models with them, we have started with the premise that says it has to be community health worker and neighbor-driven. What do we have to believe that would be in place for us to adequately train those people and track the quality of care that they deliver? And that's just a very different starting place than we have in the U.S., where we start to think about community health worker programs or promotores programs, and we sort of add them on as extenders. We're starting from a different premise than those other countries out of need and necessity that says the community health worker will be the main. They're lucky to have a community health worker with any training at all, right? So how can we start with that as the premise and then sort of work back to, okay, somewhere there's a doctor and a nurse and other sort of more experts trained in the system. They have to play a very different quarterbacking role as they go forward. But I think the key is segmentation, right? I didn't share it today, but this is why we have a segmentation of patients, a segmentation of family caregivers, and a segmentation of clinicians, and we try to target your diffusion of innovation for the right segment at the right time. Should we wrap it up there? All right, let's make personal health. Oh, one more.
What are your thoughts on personal health records and where that's going to go?
As a patient, I'm really pissed off that they're still not sort of widely available. And this is part of my point about all these people telling me that they have a PHR for me. Right? It's like I have 8 different companies telling me, we have your PHR, and none of them have all of my data in it, right? Not even close. I gave one of the first talks on PHRs 15 years ago at a Robert Wood Johnson conference that got them excited about PHRs, and I've been wanting them to exist for quite a long time. Full disclosure, I sit on the board of Dacia, our not-for-profit PHR company that Intel set up for large employers some years ago. Even within our own Intel employee community, it's not taken off widely, and part of the problem that we have now is that every device vendor, every software vendor, and every provider wants to own that because they want to try to monetize some of the de-identified data off of that. And I'm like, I'm sorry, in your efforts to sort of drive growth business models for yourselves, you're making it for me as a patient not able to get access to my own records, right? And that's unacceptable. So this is going to be one of our next big sort of privacy and security challenges is every single entity out there, as their current business model is being disrupted, is trying to look at monetizing de-identified data in some interesting ways and creating services, and you'll use my service in the cloud. And it's like, well, it's not practical. A patient is not going to want to end up having to use 9 different applications and 9 different devices. When I was in recovery from my own illness, I had to take all my vital signs and all of this from home. And I tried to go to one vendor who could come into one application and let me do all the different things I needed to capture for that period of time. It was impossible still. Even with Continua that we helped start to go drive standards on the device side, even with the advances in PHRs, I'm still having to use 3 different applications because of proprietary systems, because of each one trying to sort of lock you into their particular business model and their recurring yearly fee. We're going to have to sort of demand a very different set of rights and to actually finally make that happen. One more, he says.
Can you hear me? Oh, okay, real quick. So do you see that as the challenge for the next generation of PHRs to be able to get this interoperability, to apply the privacy and security, to be able to not necessarily disrupt everything completely, but to be able to make those connections?
In some sense, I think we will move. In some sense, PHRs, as we have conceived them, as these sort of static databases of all your data in one place, will probably never happen. Probably what will happen is the emergence of care coordination tools will end up sort of creating PHR-like infrastructure underneath them because it's the only way that you're going to be able to do collective decision support. If your decision support algorithms that are helping to optimize care, quality, and cost for a team of people are going to work, it can only work if it has all of the data feeds. So if we, in some sense, stop trying to build the database and build the value proposition of what the database would bring, meaning decision support for really just-in-time care just for me, if we start delivering that value, we'll end up creating a PHR sort of as a de facto way of doing it. So in some ways, I think the mistake of the PHR movement, and I was part of that, and I failed at it as much as anybody, was we focused, it was like, I want Quicken to manage my finances, but I'm going to talk to you about the database that sits underneath Quicken a lot. I don't know what database sits underneath Quicken today. I just know that it works, right, and helps me sort of manage my finances. We didn't talk about the value propositions and the verbs of the activities you could do with the tools enough and focus there. We got bogged down in ontologies, and all that's important, but we would have gotten to that stuff if it had been driven by passionate need for the verbs and the activities that you were allowed to do. So focus on the end user values, and the rest will follow. That's a good note to end on. Thanks.